On May 9, 2025, Stephen Miller, a top advisor to the president, made a shocking announcement. He said the White House was considering suspending due process for migrants. Miller argued that the Constitution allows this during an invasion. His statement sparked immediate controversy. It raised questions about the rights of migrants and the power of the government. The announcement was widely reported by major news outlets. Miller's statement is just the latest in a series of actions by the Trump administration aimed at restricting immigration. Since taking office, President Trump has made it clear that he intends to crack down on illegal immigration. He has implemented a number of policies aimed at deterring migrants from coming to the United States. These include separating families at the border and building a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. The administration's efforts to restrict immigration have been met with fierce opposition from Democrats and immigrant rights groups. They argue that the administration's policies are cruel and inhumane. They also argue that these policies are ineffective and will not solve the problem of illegal immigration. Miller's statement is a sign that the administration is willing to go even further in its efforts to restrict immigration. If the administration does move to suspend due process for migrants, it is sure to face legal challenges. The outcome of these challenges will have a major impact on the future of immigration in the United States. To understand the gravity of Miller's statement, it is essential to understand the writ of habeas corpus. This legal principle, enshrined in the U.S. Constitution, allows individuals to challenge their detention in court. It acts as a safeguard against unlawful imprisonment. The writ of habeas corpus is a fundamental right that protects all individuals, regardless of their citizenship status. The Constitution does allow for the suspension of habeas corpus, but only in very limited circumstances. Specifically, it can be suspended during times of invasion or rebellion. However, the Constitution does not define invasion or rebellion. This ambiguity leaves the door open for interpretation, and the Trump administration appears to be interpreting it broadly. The administration's interpretation of invasion is particularly concerning. The term is typically used to describe a military invasion by a foreign power. However, the administration appears to be using it to refer to the influx of migrants at the southern border. This is a dangerous and unprecedented expansion of the term. The Trump administration is not the first to attempt to limit the scope of habeas corpus. Throughout American history, there have been several instances where the government has sought to restrict this fundamental right, often during times of war or national crisis. However, the courts have consistently upheld the importance of habeas corpus, recognizing it as a cornerstone of American democracy. The Trump administration argues that suspending due process for migrants is necessary to address the crisis at the southern border. They point to the increasing number of migrants attempting to enter the United States illegally. They also highlight the strain that this influx is putting on border resources and detention facilities. Furthermore, the administration argues that the current system of due process is being abused by migrants. They claim that many migrants are filing frivolous asylum claims in order to delay their deportation. The administration believes that suspending due process will deter these frivolous claims and expedite the removal of undocumented immigrants. The Trump administration's stance reflects a broader trend of increased hostility towards immigrants. This hostility is fueled by a number of factors, including economic anxiety, cultural anxieties, and concerns about national security. The administration has capitalized on these anxieties, using them to justify its restrictive immigration policies. However, critics of the administration argue that its policies are not only inhumane, but also counterproductive. They argue that these policies are actually making the situation at the border worse by creating chaos and driving migrants underground. Moreover, they argue that these policies are undermining America's values and its standing in the world. Legal experts have been quick to condemn Miller's statement. They argue that suspending due process for migrants would be a clear violation of the Constitution. The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution guarantees due process of law to all persons within the United States. This includes citizens and non-citizens alike. Jordan Rubin, a legal scholar, has been particularly critical of Miller's interpretation of due process. Rubin argues that Miller's claim that due process only applies to criminal defendants is fundamentally incorrect. Rubin points out that due process applies to a wide range of government actions, including immigration proceedings. Moreover, the Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed the due process rights of immigrants. In the landmark case of Zadvydas v. Davis in 2001, the court ruled that the government cannot indefinitely detain immigrants who are facing deportation. The court held that such detention would violate the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment. The Trump administration's attempt to circumvent due process is not limited to Miller's recent statement. The administration has previously invoked the Alien Enemies Act to deport alleged gang members without due process. This move has been challenged in the courts, and its legality remains uncertain. Section 5. The President's Stance. President Trump has been vocal in his support for restricting due process rights for migrants. In a recent interview on Meet the Press, Trump stated that his mandate is to deport unauthorized immigrants. He expressed frustration with the courts, which he believes are slowing down the deportation process. Trump acknowledged the Fifth Amendment's Due Process Clause but argued that it is impractical for mass deportations. He suggested that due process requirements make it nearly impossible to efficiently remove large numbers of undocumented immigrants. Further illustrating his stance, Miller, in a social media post, claimed that due process protects criminal defendants, not illegal aliens. He argued that the Constitution protects citizens from government overreach, not foreign trespassers. This statement drew sharp criticism from legal experts, who pointed out that it contradicts established legal understanding and precedent. The president's and his administration's stance on due process reflects a broader debate about the balance between national security and individual rights. The administration argues that protecting the country from perceived threats requires limiting the rights of certain groups, including immigrants. Section 6. Implications for migrants. If the Trump administration does move to suspend due process for migrants, it would have dire consequences. Migrants facing deportation would be denied the opportunity to present their case before a judge. They would be denied the opportunity to apply for asylum or other forms of relief. Furthermore, suspending due process would likely lead to an increase in wrongful deportations. Without due process, there would be no mechanism to ensure that migrants are being deported for legitimate reasons. This would put countless individuals at risk of being separated from their families and sent back to countries where they face persecution. The potential suspension of due process has sent shockwaves through immigrant communities across the United States. Many migrants are living in fear, uncertain of their future in the country. The administration's actions have created a climate of fear and uncertainty, making it increasingly difficult for migrants to rebuild their lives. The erosion of due process rights for migrants is not just an immigration issue, it is a human rights issue. The right to due process is a fundamental human right that is enshrined in international law. By stripping migrants of this right, the United States would be violating its obligations under international law and undermining its commitment to human rights. Section 7. Historical context. The current debate over due process for migrants is not new. Throughout American history, there have been periods of intense anti-immigrant sentiment, often accompanied by efforts to restrict the rights of immigrants. During World War II, for example, the U.S. government interned Japanese Americans, denying them due process and basic civil liberties. The internment of Japanese Americans is a dark chapter in American history. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of sacrificing civil liberties in the name of national security. The Trump administration's efforts to restrict due process for migrants echo this dark chapter, raising concerns about the potential for history to repeat itself. The lessons learned from the internment of Japanese Americans are particularly relevant today. The government's actions during World War II were based on fear and prejudice, not on any legitimate security threat. Similarly, the Trump administration's policies are driven by a climate of fear and xenophobia, rather than by evidence-based policymaking. The historical context of due process for immigrants highlights the importance of vigilance and the need to protect the rights of all individuals, regardless of their immigration status. It is a reminder that the erosion of civil liberties often begins with the targeting of marginalized groups. Section 8. A broader debate. The debate over due process for migrants is part of a broader debate about the values of American society. On one side of the debate are those who believe that the United States has a moral obligation to welcome immigrants and to afford them the same rights and protections as citizens. On the other side of the debate are those who believe that the United States must prioritize the needs of its citizens and that immigration must be strictly controlled. This side often views immigrants as a threat to American culture, jobs, and security. The Trump administration's policies have exacerbated this debate, pitting Americans against each other and creating deep divisions within society. The administration's rhetoric and actions have emboldened anti-immigrant sentiment, leading to a rise in hate crimes and discrimination against immigrants. The debate over due process for migrants is ultimately a debate about what kind of country the United States wants to be. It is a debate about whether the United States will uphold its founding principles of liberty and justice for all, or whether it will abandon these principles in the name of expediency and nativism. Section 9, Conclusion: A Nation at a Crossroads. Stephen Miller's statement about suspending due process for migrants has ignited a firestorm of controversy. It has raised profound questions about the rule of law, the rights of immigrants, and the future of American democracy. The outcome of this debate will have far-reaching implications for the country. If the Trump administration succeeds in suspending due process for migrants, it would set a dangerous precedent. It would normalize the erosion of civil liberties and undermine the very foundations of American democracy. It would also have a devastating impact on the lives of countless migrants who have come to the United States seeking a better life. At this critical juncture, it is imperative that Americans stand up for the values that make the United States a beacon of hope and freedom. The right to due process is a cornerstone of American democracy. It must be protected for all, regardless of their immigration status. The United States is at a crossroads. The choices it makes today will determine its course for generations to come. The country must decide whether it will embrace its diversity and uphold its commitment to human rights, or whether it will succumb to fear and division.